We euthanized him. We didn't kill him.
Well, euthanasia is not legal.
Well, it is, because hospice does it all the time. They give you the lethal dose of morphine. I've seen it. I've done it myself.
But did you really think it was upon yourself to decide whether he should be euthanized? Did he ask for euthanasia and you said no?
We made the decision.
The family of Anthony Tomaselli lived for years believing their beloved father and grandfather had died of natural causes. But his daughters shared a dark secret. Unfortunately, they also shared a lover, a man who would eventually blow the lid off the secret they had sworn to take to their graves. Like that wasn't bizarre enough already, as investigators dug deeper into the nature of the crime itself, the motives of the people involved would only become stranger and more perplexing. Join us down the rabbit hole that is the deranged case of the Tomaselli sisters.
And that wasn't working because he was very strong and he was pushing it off. And so she said, okay, the next thing we'll have to do is we have to get a washcloth and put it in his mouth, and Rose is going to have to hold his nose, and
hold his arms.
We had to finish what we had started.
Welcome to Fear Files, where we discuss and dissect the most mysterious, terrifying, and mind-bending cases from all over the world. Before we start, we would like to send our thoughts and prayers to the loved ones of Anthony Tomaselli, who fell victim to the abominable acts described in this case. This story takes us once again to the sunny state of Florida, this time to the small beachside town of Palm Harbor, 25 miles northwest of Tampa. By now, you've heard enough about the Gulf Coast of Florida to know that it's all sunshine, palm trees, and white sand beaches. The town of Palm Harbor had all this and more, including warm mineral springs and a famous golf course, the Innisbrook Resort and Golf Club. It was in Palm Harbor that an Italian barber named Anthony Joseph Tomaselli moved with his wife and 3 children in the 1960s with high hopes of a new life in the Florida sunshine. Over the coming decades, like many small-town barbers, Anthony would become a well-known figure in the local community. People described him as gregarious, hard-working, and generous, a warm-hearted man who would do anything for his family and shared every penny of his hard-earned cash with his children, Charles, Mary Beth, and Linda. His youngest and favorite daughter, Linda, in particular, would benefit from her father's generous streak, later letting him fork out for a facelift and cosmetic dental work. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Linda studied at Tampa College and went on to become a certified medical assistant. Mary Beth worked in various administrative roles. But both sisters would display seriously questionable taste in men. Mary Beth's husband was described by those who knew him as a hillbilly with no common sense, who, after 2 children and a divorce, left Mary Beth bankrupt. Linda's husband, Ted, meanwhile, lowered the bar even further, regularly leaving her with bruises and terrorizing her to the point where she purchased a gun for protection. Linda would spend years separating, then reuniting with him, getting restraining orders against him, and then moving in with him once again. The death of their mother in the late 1990s was a devastating blow for Anthony. He eventually settled down again, this time with a woman named Shirley Shannon, with whom he'd spent nearly 2 decades with before she passed away in February of 2015. It's here that our story really begins, because in the days following the death of Shirley, 85-year-old Anthony's lifelong dedication to his children would be returned to him in spades. Grief-stricken over the loss of Shirley, Anthony took comfort in the loving support of his daughters Linda and Mary Beth. Meanwhile, his granddaughter, 41-year-old Lauren Johnson, moved into the spare room of his whitewashed bungalow on Nottingham Close in Palm Harbor to help with the chores and to keep him company. But his daughters were worried. Without Shirley around, who was going to look after their ailing dad? He wasn't fit to live on his own, his health was poor, and he was refusing to move into an assisted living facility they'd found for him. So, on the night of March 5th, 2015, 3 weeks after Shirley's death, his daughters made a difficult decision. It was something they'd been bouncing back and forth for days. They needed to euthanize Anthony. It would be their ultimate act of kindness. On February 13, 2019, 52-year-old Anthony Marshall sat on a sofa listening to the woman he'd been dating on and off for about 4 months share with him a harrowing tale. 5 minutes into her story, Marshall hit record on his phone. Here's Linda Roberts sharing her tale 4 years after her dad's death.
So anyway, he went to sleep.
Okay.
We thought he was
Dead?
dead.
And? He
He
wasn't.
opened his eyes
He opened his
and
eyes.
he looked at us.
He looked at you.
And I said, now what do we do?
You asked her now what to do?
I said, what do we do now?
So then
I
what?
don't know if I can even tell the rest of it.
You put a pillow over his face.
Yeah, we did. Not a pillow, but we did. And just breathing, yes.
By pinching his nose? Did you pinch your father's nose? How did you do it?
Can't talk anymore.
What do you mean you can't talk? You already told me. This is the only way to get it off your chest. You've never told anybody. You might as well finish. So I know, and you know, that the truth has been told.
On the subject of sisters and murder, have you ever wanted to add an interactive dimension to your love of true crime investigation? June's Journey is a hidden object mystery game that puts you in the role of June Parker, who's on a mission to solve the mystery behind the brutal murder of her sister. Apply your eye for detail while under time pressure to unlock the clues that will identify her killer. June's Journey is a game that combines 3 things that we can't get enough of: murder and criminal investigation, a chance to compete in a game of speed and observation, and the ultimate setting for any murder mystery, the glamorous 1920s. You can download June's Journey for free by clicking on the link below in the description. June's Journey is available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as PC through Facebook Games.
Shock and sadness as people in one community learned their neighbor did not die of old age, but reportedly killed by his own daughters. ABC Action News reporter Michael Paluska with why some of them are always suspicious, even when deputies were not.
The sheriff told us what happened inside this home was the perfect murder, and he told us that those sisters would have gotten away with killing their father if they just would have stayed quiet.
Before we go any further, let's take a quick look back at how we got here. On the day of his death in 2015, Anthony Tomaselli's cause of death had been ruled as the result of natural causes due to advanced age and an extensive medical history. The house in Palm Harbor, his car, and other assets were sold, and the money divided between his 3 children. Life had then resumed pretty much as normal. In 2017, Mary Beth and Linda, who had once again left her husband Ted, moved into a condo together. And then into their lives came Anthony Marshall, a man who would change everything forever. Marshall was a guitarist in a cover band that regularly performed in the Tampa Bay area. He was married. One evening in late 2018, he got to chatting on Facebook with 63-year-old Mary Beth Tomaselli. After meeting at one of his gigs, the two had begun dating. On their 3rd date, she had introduced him to her sister, 61-year-old Linda Roberts. But 2 weeks later, their affair was over. Mary Beth had discovered that Marshall was now sleeping with Linda. His affair with Linda would go on for the next 4 months, whenever she was in town and not visiting her estranged husband in North Carolina. But by January of 2019, Marshall was ready to move on. Linda had mental problems, he decided. She messaged him incessantly. When he broke up with her, she hounded him until he blocked her. She then went on to create new accounts to continue to contact him. On February 13th, she asked him to meet with her. She wanted to explain the cause of her strange behavior. She had a secret, she said, something that had been haunting her for years and giving her nightmares, often revolving around her deceased father standing at the foot of her bed. Marshall braced himself for a story of childhood trauma. He was certainly not ready to hear what was to come next.
You killed your father 4 years ago.
Do you have to say it like that?
Well, but
and
that's...
don't just say it to me, because it was my sister too.
And Mary Beth.
We euthanized him. We didn't kill him.
Well, euthanasia is not legal.
Well, it is, because hospice does it all the time. They give you the lethal dose of morphine. I've seen it. I've done it myself.
But did you really think it was upon yourself to decide whether he should be euthanized? The very first thing I asked you when this conversation started is like, you euthanized your father. You said yes. And I said, did he ask for euthanasia? And you said, no.
We made the decision, okay?
Right, you made the decision. You and Mary Beth made the decision.
Yes.
Now, in case you missed it, here's a quick recap. Back in 2015, Linda's father had severe dementia and terminal lung cancer and had weeks or even days to live. Linda had spent her working life watching people die from cancer. She couldn't bear to see him suffer like that. After all, he was the most important man in her life. Linda had given Mary Beth's daughter, Lauren, a sleeping pill. Then she made Anthony comfortable on the couch. Mary Beth mixed a lethal dose of sleeping pills into his usual nightcap of vodka and Coke. It should have been enough to overdose him. But Mary Beth had added too much soda. Anthony had only taken 5 or 6 gulps. 20 minutes later, he was trembling, groggy. He dropped the prayer cards that he read every night on the floor, but was still very much alive. So, the sisters had suffocated him. The next morning, they'd staged the scene to make it look like they had just discovered his lifeless body. Linda performed chest compressions on him for a half hour in front of Lauren until paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead. And then Linda added a few more chilling details. Mary Beth had been fighting with her dad ever since Shirley had died. Unlike with Linda, Anthony had a contentious relationship with Mary Beth and had always taken his anger out on her. Meanwhile, she had a mean streak and a terrible temper of her own. Her desire to end Anthony's life had been in part driven by malice.
Actually, you don't know my sister. My sister has a temper 10 times worse than I do.
But why did she have a temper? Why was this ending his life anything to do with the temper? She was mad at him?
Yes, they had terrible arguments because he didn't want to go into Brookfield.
So she was mad at him when she murdered him?
Yeah, she was mad at him.
I'm just saying, I'm pissed off. I'm pissed off. I'm pissed off that you murdered your own father. And you said he was the greatest guy ever. You said Mary Beth was actually mad at him, so she was angry and she had a temper. She was happy to murder him for different reasons. So it could be said that she did it with malice. Like she was mad and she's like, let's just kill him. I'm sick of his ass.
We use the word kill.
Let's euthanize him.
We use the word put him out of his misery.
But she was mad at him. You just admitted it.
One quick aside, in the U.S., it is legal during palliative care to administer the necessary dose of narcotics to relieve pain, even if it hastens death. It's a gray area in the end-of-life care that's rarely examined. In this case, however, it's also irrelevant. Linda was not a practitioner, her father was not in a palliative care unit, and narcotics is not a synonym for suffocation with cloth. The next day, Marshall headed into the Pinellas County Sheriff's Detective Office with his recording in hand. he was nervous owing to his own long rap sheet of convictions. Police couldn't use Marshall's unauthorized recording as evidence, so they fitted him with a wire and sent him back to meet Linda that same afternoon while they listened in. Marshall turned up at Linda Roberts that evening for a second DIY interrogation, complete with his own commentary that she was headed straight to hell. Linda was happy to share every detail, and she threw in a few more, like that Mary Beth had been facing bankruptcy at the time. She needed cash urgently, and the sale of that house in Palm Harbor would drop $100,000 into each of their accounts. With this damning evidence in the hands of law enforcement, Mary Beth was now called into the police station. She sat down calmly, with the air of someone long resigned to facing the death penalty in the electric chair, and immediately confessed to the killing. You see, Mary Beth had already been given a heads up from Marshall about Linda's taped confession. She'd later tell Linda he'd tried to use it to blackmail her into having sex with him. Mary Beth had quite a different account of what happened that night.
This one night, I came home and my sister, who's in the medical field, she's a certified medical assistant.
Oh, she's an assistant?
A CMA. She said to me that she had been thinking about Dad and his situation with his lung cancer coming back, with what we were going to deal with, his dementia, him not understanding, and what it was going to be like for him. And he was, the way we felt he was suffering, the way we felt he was suffering. She said she thought that perhaps we could put him out of his suffering.
Okay. Was this a conversation you had in person or over the phone?
No, together.
You were together at his
house?
We
were laying in bed.
So then what did you say to that?
Well, at that moment, after everything, the way things were at this time, I had hesitations. However, I understand I don't have the right to take someone's life, if that's what you're asking me.
Okay.
I know right from wrong.
Okay.
However, I felt I couldn't see my father at 88 going through this surgery. I didn't think he was going to make it through this surgery, this dementia. I couldn't handle watching my father suffer this way 24/7, the way he was going. And unless you lived with him and saw him, and I was with him from Friday night through Sunday morning when I went to work, I was the one that was with him. I honestly felt that I couldn't watch my father suffer this way.
Okay.
So I agreed with her.
And what was the plan?
Her plan was, my father took sleeping pills at night. He took Xanax as well, and blood pressure, and cholesterol. I don't remember exactly what medications my father took. And she said that if we were to do this, when my dad had a drink that evening, on that Thursday evening, that we would put, she thought, I think 15 of his sleeping pills, and I don't remember if they were capsules, honestly, or if they were tablets, put it in his drink, and he would make a big drink.
What was that? What kind of alcohol would that be?
Vodka and Coca-Cola. Okay. I believe.
He would drink this every night?
He would drink 2 or 3 every night.
2 or 3 a night, okay.
And most nights he could hardly walk, and he was always falling in the bed. Falling, getting out, going into the bathroom. And she said we would put the sleeping pill in his
drink?
In his drink when he asked for it about 9 or 10 o'clock. I can't remember about what
that's
time.
fine.
But Linda's calculation had been off, and the pills hadn't worked. He was struggling and stumbling around. What happened next wasn't planned. With no emotion, she talks about how Anthony had struggled and fought for breath as they suffocated him. A few more strange details now emerged. On a normal evening, Anthony would have made his own drinks, she said, often having 3 or 4. He'd often stay up late watching baseball. Surprisingly lucid activities for a man supposedly in the throes of advanced dementia. Oh, and just a side thought, Linda was a pathological liar and evil, with paranoid ideations that Mary Beth was secretly communicating with Marshall behind her back. Importantly, though, Mary Beth wasn't bankrupt at the time. She'd euthanized her father because she couldn't bear to watch him losing his mind to dementia, and he was going downhill fast. He had to be reminded to eat and was often up all night. It had reached the stage where he couldn't be left on his own, and she had been left with most of the responsibility for caring for him. But just mention the idea of moving into an assisted living facility would send him into an uncontrollable rage. Next, it was Linda's turn in the interview room. She hadn't been given a heads-up by Marshall. When confronted with her own taped confession, she repeated the account she had given Marshall, implying Mary Beth was the instigator of the killing and had a financial incentive for doing so. Police concluded their interviews by arresting both women. Neither Linda nor Mary Beth would ever return home. By the next day, their faces would be splashed all over the local news, with headlines naming them as the sisters who'd murdered their own father. Everyone who'd ever known them was horrified, including Mary Beth's daughter, Lauren Johnson, who had been there on the night of the murder. The next day, Lauren Johnson was brought in for an interview. She had discovered her mother was a murderer on the news, and her version of events would differ considerably to her mother's, essentially turning the case upside down.
My uncle sat down, my mom sat down, and they agreed before they even called me to please come take care of Papa. We want you to move in. And the next morning, Ted came and picked me up from my house in Largo, brought my stuff, and I moved right in with Papa while we were cleaning out Shirley's stuff.
Okay.
But it was never an issue, but he was adamant about not going to an assisted living.
And what did your mom say and Linda say about that?
They argued with him about it, you need to go, you need to be watched 24/7, kind of like they felt like it would bother me, which my grandfather and I had both agreed that it was not a problem for me to stay and take care of him. He was happy at this point.
Right.
You know, he was happy playing cards with me and watching Price is Right all day and going to lunch. He had a life. He did not want to be stuck in an assisted living facility with old people, as he called it, because I'll just die there. And that's what he said.
Okay.
He did not want to go there. Okay. But they were not happy with his decision. My aunt said, I believe it was the night before he passed, or, one the night she came to visit, that he was not able to make his own decisions, and she felt like he was incompetent and things like that.
What is your opinion
I
on
disagreed with her.
Okay.
Big time. I disagreed. Sure.
You argued with her about that? Or?
Well, I didn't argue because that's their dad, but I put my 2 cents in and said, he's 85. If the doctors don't think he needs to not have a license, that he can drive, they don't think he needs his power of attorney to take over his finances, he doesn't. I don't feel he was incompetent at all.
Okay.
Sure,
you were living with him most of the time.
Right.
So that's why I wanted to ask you.
Except for the last 2 days of his life when he started calling me Mary Beth and my mom Rosalie.
Right.
I started to see a decline those last 2 days. But within the 10 days, sure, he'd forget little things like, did I take my milk of magnesia or did I take my pills? And he would just look in the container, but
for the most part,
he would have been all right to have me stay with him.
Okay.
When you went to the doctor, because you said that the day before, you went to his doctor's appointment.
His primary.
His primary. Are you in the room with them?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you recall what the doctor said at that time?
We went and saw the primary, and he listened to his lungs, and he said, Tony, I just want you to have a chest x-ray. I think my grandfather said his anxiety was bad, or Linda had talked to him and told him his anxiety got a little bad because Shirley had passed away.
Which is normal.
Which is normal because you outlived
How long
two
were
of
they
them.
together?
About 20 years.
Oh, 20 years. Okay.
Oh yeah, because my son's 16, so I would say longer than, right when he was born, so they were about together almost 20 years. So that was his partner, and so she died, and so he's on edge and he's a little shaky.
Was he like terminal? Was he?
He had lung cancer years before, and he had part of his lung removed. But for years he's been okay. Like he had high cholesterol and blood pressure. But other than that, the cancer had not come back to my knowledge, because I was never aware of it until we went and had the chest x-ray. And they just told her that they saw like a spot on his lung or a mass on his lung, and so they wanted him to go see the pulmonologist.
So it wasn't like a huge, massive, like something very...
Not from what I know, no.
From what you know.
No.
Lauren told police she'd moved into the spare bedroom of her grandfather's bungalow shortly after Shirley's death. Growing up, Anthony had been the male role model in her life, and she was more than happy to live with him for as long as was needed. But Linda had been adamant that he needed to be shifted out of the house and into an assisted living facility. It didn't make sense, she said. Despite being well up in years, Anthony was still enjoying life. He still had his driver's license and would do his own grocery shopping. Far from being demented and bedridden, he was able to walk without a cane and was alert enough to play cards with her, enjoy baseball, and take an evening drive down to Clearwater Beach to watch the sunset. On the night of March 5th, they'd received a call from his doctor that an X-ray had revealed a small mass in one lung. It could have been his cancer coming back, but they wouldn't know that until they'd conducted more tests. When they got home from the drive to the beach, Linda had offered her a sleeping tablet, which she accepted, not realizing that it was to get her out of the way while they euthanized her grandfather. She'd noticed he was acting strange and groggy after his nightcap, but Linda and Mary Beth had said they would stay up with him. They laid him on the sofa to sleep, which wasn't his usual routine at all. The next morning, she'd awoken early to the sound of screams from the lounge room. Her aunt was doing CPR, and her mother, Mary Beth, was trying to call 911, but was shaking too badly to make the call. Lauren had dialed them for her. Lauren's account entirely recast the sisters' claim of a mercy killing. But then, what had motivated Linda and Mary Beth to kill their own father? Could it really have been as cold as resentment over being saddled with caring for their father now that Shirley was gone? Or was it the prospect of a quick $100,000? And then came the final police interview. And this one, well, this would shine a light on yet another dark side to the Tomaselli family. The interview was with a retired family doctor who had employed Linda as a medical assistant for over 30 years. He'd known Anthony Tomaselli well over the years, and 2 years earlier had employed his granddaughter, Lauren Johnson, as his office assistant. Clearly, he was a dear and close friend of the family, right? Not anymore.
Let me explain a little story here.
Yes, please.
Lauren, the younger niece,
Yes.
Lynn brought her into work for me because she wanted to pull out and retire. So I let Lauren stay there and work it. And she did okay at first. She did okay.
She did office work there. What was her?
Yeah, just office work, but I told her how to give some shots.
Okay.
Basic shots
All
like
right.
B12 and the other things.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing class drug. But, and she worked there for about, I guess it was a year, maybe a little more than a year. And it wasn't full time. We were only open a few days a week. But more and more I noticed money was missing. I fired Lauren, or didn't hire her back to work in Tarpon.
Mm-hmm.
She was really mad about that and called a lot of my patients in to borrow money from them. And I said, don't lend her any money.
Right.
So Lauren was pretty aggravated by it, and evidently got a new boyfriend, and the boyfriend had a brother, and my house was robbed.
Okay.
The sheriff's department knows about it. Cars were stolen. There was a lot of damage.
What was stolen?
My car. They piled. I had a gun collection. They piled some of the guns in the car.
They took the car too?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They took the car. They totaled it. It was a Range Rover. It was my favorite car. I could never afford to buy a car like that again. The way I got that.
Right. So that's awful.
That was bad. I still haven't put in a claim yet for it. I've been so. Because my wife's leg had to be amputated the day after that.
Right.
So, yeah, so I just, it sort of put me in a funny mood.
Of course it would.
I just haven't put in a claim yet.
Right. Now, how long ago was this? All right.
A little more than a year ago. So that was my experience with Lauren. Lauren was a terrible experience. She kept, even after that, calling my patients for money. But I spoke to my patients and they stopped. So they thought she was just the greatest thing that ever lived.
So, if we're to believe the doctor's account, Lauren, too, was truly a terrible person. She'd reciprocated his offer of work by stealing cash from his office and then his patients before passing details of his home address on to someone that would rob his home. Linda, too, it turned out, had coldly exploited and stolen from her employer through the latter years of her employment. What about Mary Beth? She was a good and honest woman, he said. A good and honest woman who had suffocated her own dad. Really? Somehow it seems the big-hearted Anthony Tomaselli had wound up spending his final days in a nest of vipers, who he had lovingly raised himself. Lauren Johnson had been right on one account, though. Anthony had not been on death's door, and any claim of a mercy killing was a moot point. Prosecutor Thomas Koskanas said, "We had some normal health issues for someone you might expect of that age, but he was in no way sick to the point that he was terminal." Mary Beth Tomaselli and Linda Roberts were arrested on March 5, 2019. After reaching a plea deal that avoided trial, Linda was sentenced in March of this year, and Mary Beth the following month. Linda was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mary Beth, after offering to testify against her sister, was sentenced to 15 years.
Sisters charged with murdering their father and then trying to cover it up will not leave jail anytime soon. A judge denied bond for both of them following their arrest on first-degree murder charges. News Channel 8's Jamel Lene joins us now live from the Pinellas County Courthouse where that hearing took place today. Jamel.
Oh, good evening. I can tell you that Linda Roberts and Mary Beth Tomaselli had very little to say in court this afternoon. Appearing in orange jumpsuits,
you're charged with murder in the first degree.
Sisters Linda Roberts and Mary Beth Tomaselli went before Judge Nancy Lay this afternoon. Both are facing first-degree murder charges for the death of their father, Anthony Tomaselli.
And I have met with her and family.
The murder was premeditated, according to Sheriff Bob Gualtieri. Their elaborate cover-up revealed after a man came forward to detectives, saying he had a recording of the confession from Roberts. Investigators say the sisters gave their father alcohol and an excessive amount of pills. When that didn't work,
Linda tried to suffocate him by placing a pillow over his face. And when that didn't work, Linda took a rag and stuffed the rag down his throat,
pinching his nose while holding his arms down until he stopped breathing. The sisters live separately in Palm Harbor. No one was at either house today. Erme Mayosoto, who lives next to Roberts, was in disbelief.
Well, surprised for, nobody's supposed to kill his, nobody. For the member of the family, that's so bad.
And we did request interviews with both sisters today here at the jail. Well, we were denied.
There were no red flags. Nobody suspected anything, says Detective Michael Bailey. Both sisters claimed this was putting him out of his misery. Except he wasn't in any misery. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video. Comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also, hit that notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. If you have a case you would like to see given more coverage, drop us a note in the comments. And thank you for your recent surge of support. We are grateful for every one of our subscribers. So, until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.